Hi, I'm Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy, and today is the first in a series of videos I'm going to be trying to do. There's sort of like a reaction video, as I will be reacting to a video, or in some cases it might be something else. But I'm also taking from the point of view of a genealogist. I'm going to be reacting to videos about historical people, and today the one I'm doing is about the Halifax Explosion. It was a quick, short video, which is part of a series of videos that was put out by the Canadian government, sponsored by the Canadian government to help promote history. They were 1 minute snippets. They were called heritage moments or heritage minutes. They started in 1991, and this one is about the Halifax Explosion. This is something that's personal to me, as my father's family is from Halifax, and his father was born before the explosion. His family lived in the area out there, and it did affect them. But it's not just the own family connection. It's other people that I've known whose families have had family who lost their lives or were greatly impacted. It made a big impact in the city. For you, those of you who don't know about the Halifax Explosion, it's the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. And it's the largest man-made non-nuclear explosion ever. It wiped out a big part of the city of Halifax. There was tremendous loss of life, loss of property. And this video we're going to watch is about one particular person who was a hero in some ways. Some people would call him. He would probably just say he was doing his job. He was doing what he was supposed to do. So let's get on with the video, and I might stop it in one or two spots. It's only a minute. I'll talk a little bit more about the Halifax Explosion, and then I will talk about some genealogical sources. Before get into that, always, if you like this type of content, make sure you subscribe. If you're not subscribed, leave a comment. I love hearing your comments, and I really appreciate it. So let's begin.
My God, look at that.
Thank God she's a half a mile away, huh?
She's loaded, boys. You gotta get out of here. It's full of explosives.
Children, come on.
Okay, so with this, it was the explosion actually happened about half hour after the initial impact of two ships. There was the French ship Mont-Blanc, which was a munition ship which had been fully loaded. It was coming from New York and was heading to France and then there was a relief ship. It was a Norwegian relief ship called the Emo, which was actually on its way from Europe to New York to pick up relief supplies that would be delivering them back to the Netherlands. At the beginning, a lot of people did not know that the Mont Blanc was loaded with ammunition. So you'll see in this video there are people standing watching it, and they didn't even really realize unless they were in the know. Vince Coleman, he was a he works for the railroad. He was a signalman. I guess not really a signalman. Those are the guys that do the signals on the train. He was we'd call him a radio operator, but at this point it was telegraph. and he was a dispatcher. He would have known a little bit about what was going on at the harbor. They had done a major renovation in the harbor to help accommodate railroads in the 1890s, and it was the way they were transporting. It didn't have trucks, so trade from the harbor, it would come in through the railroad and head east, and in some cases down south even, to New England. So we're going to just continue to watch this and watch what transpires.
Oh no. Bill, get out of here! Vince!
I'm back in the school.
Please, get these children out of here! That ship is gonna blow! No!
Mr. Coleman.
Hurry! Hurry! You gotta get these people out of here! That ship is gonna blow! The train.
What?
People, get out of here! It's gonna blow up!
Like I mentioned, people were just watching it on fire. They didn't realize it. In this video, it's trying to show that because they seem to be skeptical of the whole situation. As you can just saw, Barbara was going back to giving somebody a shave. So Vince, in this case, just realized that there was a train that was on its way, and he realized this boat was going to blow and that it was going to cause some damage. It wound up damaging quite an area. The shock waves were felt to the southern and northern points of the province. People reported feeling shock waves. It caused a tsunami, which washed up debris from the ships further into the Bedford Basin over the next few days.
Mission ship on fire. Stop train. Please, God, answer.
Coleman, there's no time.
The train's coming in towards Pier 6. I've got to warn you.
Come on, Vince, come on.
There are 700 people aboard it. I've got to stop it. Come on, acknowledge.
Halifax was devastated. 9,000 wounded, 2,000 dead, including Vince Coleman, dispatcher.
So, as they said at the end there, over 2,000 people died, and there was a large number of injured. Just a few other details around the explosion. It helped create a real relationship between Boston and Nova Scotia, one that's still recognized to this day, between the cities, actually between all of Nova Scotia and Boston. Not only are the Nova Scotians already have a lot of relatives and continue to have relatives through the early part of the 20th century that freely traveled and worked between the two places, would move to the Boston states, as they called them, to live. But this really created a solid bond, because what happened was the city of Boston really responded. There was several tens of 20s of thousand or more people that were destitute. Their homes were blown up. That whole part of the city, because where they actually collided was a place called the Narrows, which, as you can get by the name, it's a narrow part of the harbour. Halifax, which is one of the, I believe only behind Sydney, Australia, it's the second largest natural or deepest natural harbour, and it's fairly large. There's the city of Halifax on one side, the city of Dartmouth, or what was the city of Dartmouth on the other side, and there's two bridges that go across now. They weren't there at that point. The only way to get across was either go all the way around through the Bedford Basin, or through a ferry or other nautical means, it wasn't an easy trip as it is today. So this was a spot called the Narrows, and as I said, it's a very narrow part of the harbor, the narrowest sort of part. And I believe like everything was totally destroyed on an eighth of a mile on each side of the harbor. Buildings completely flattened. Like I said, it was the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. Not only that, glass throughout the city was, even away from the harbor, was blown out of buildings. My wife's grandmother, her father, I believe it was, could be an uncle, had a grocery store in. This happened early in the morning. The initial collision was 8:30ish. It was, I think, 9:04 when, a little over 30 minutes later, that the actual explosion happened. Kids were on their way to school or at school. Schools were leveled. Their families were separated for months. Anyways, my wife's relative, her grandmother told the story. She was born just before the Halifax explosion, much like my grandparents, but too young to really remember it herself clearly. But like I said, I believe it was her father had owned a grocery store, and it blew all the windows out of his grocery store when he was in there. And again, this would just be a small grocer. It's not a large grocery store as we imagine today, just the corner market type thing. But the bakery delivery had just come, and it was piled up in behind the windows on the inside, and the bread was completely destroyed with shards of glass, but it actually saved his life because it took the impact of the glass. So it didn't hit him at his counter. So that's a little bit about the explosion. It happened in December 6, 1917. It's near the end of World War II. The war would be over in less than a year. There was still heavy traffic in the port, and the reason the munition ship was there was to help supply the fight in Europe. There were convoys generally would come from New York. They'd go into Halifax a lot of times to escape, refuel and stuff, escape the sort of the routes of the U-boats, to have a harbor, a safe harbor, so to speak. Anyways, so that's the Halifax explosion. It's really something. Really, if you don't know about it, look it up. There's a great book called Shattered City that tells a lot of stories of people from the Halifax explosion. One girl, her name all her life, she wound up being known as Ashpan Annie, because that's where they found her, in her house, in the wood stove in the ashpan, because there was families were separated, a lot of orphans whose parents were working in Harbour, near the Harbour, lived near there, but they were at school a little farther away, were a little safer. On the other side, there was also people that lost their children because they were closer to the harbor, and for whatever reason the parents were away. So Vince Coleman, the hero of the story, like I said, I don't know if he would have considered himself a hero. He would have just thought he was doing his job. As a genealogist, I want to know things about him. There's lots of things I could do, but I'm going to do what genealogists do, and I'm going to look at some genealogical sources. I'm going to save us a little bit of time because I did a little bit of pre-research on this just to bring up so I'm ready. So So let's start, and what I'm going to start with is the Nova Scotia Archives information, because this is a really good one. It lets me search births, deaths, and marriages, and I know his death. We know it was December 6th, 1917. So it's a simple thing that I'm going to be able to confirm if I find a Vince Coleman that it is the right person. So, the Nova Scotia Archives is where the genealogical information for Nova Scotia is, the vital statistics. As you see, I have it here already. I'm searching for Vince Coleman, Halifax County, because it lets me choose the county. I could put years in here. At this point, I haven't determined his date of birth. I could find it by Wikipedia, but as I will show you here in a minute, it's not necessarily, I'm not sure if it's going to be correct, because on a couple of the things I see different sources of his date of birth. So I have my information here, and I'm going to search. So I have two records here. So I have Vincent J. P. Coleman, and this is a death record, 1917, December 6th. So this is the person I know it is. This here, I have Vincent J. Coleman and his wife, Frances Amelia O'Toole, and marriage certificate from 1902. I have no birth certificate, but I'm pretty sure these are the same people. And what I'm going to do is let's first look at his death record, which is one that I found really quite interesting, just because of the way the deaths were recorded. This isn't a death certificate. This is just a record of his death. So when I searched it, this is what we see. He just enlarges here. So this is Vincent J. P. Male, December 6th, 1917. Says his age was 42. So in December 6th, if his age was 42, he would have been born, unless he was born between December 6th and the end of the year, he would have been born in 1875. Lives on Russell Street in Halifax. He's married. Halifax County. Now, cause of death, shock due to injuries and explosion. His religious denomination is Roman Catholic. He's white. The name of the undertaker is Snow and Company. They're an undertaker company that's still there, and he's buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery in Halifax. So just remember that Mount Olivet, because we're going to use that as our next stepping point. Well, this is really interesting. Though these are recorded in sequence. So these are all recorded. As I said, there was over 2,000 deaths, so you can imagine everybody that's on this page would have been around the same time. It doesn't have his occupation, which is interesting. Anyways, the next person is, it looks like Condon, Edward Patrick. He was the chief of the fire department. It gives his address as the Central Engine House of Halifax, so that would be the main fire department. Cause of death, shock due to injuries of explosion. Next person over here, shock due to the injuries from explosion. And this says, actually gives a little more. He had a ruptured spleen and periodontitis. Now we have and Cochrane. And shock due to injuries in explosion. Shock due to injuries in explosion. Shock due to injuries of explosion. December 6, 1917. All these other people here, including Vincent, if you look at the length of time of illness, no days, 7 days. This person here, they had 12 days. Gives their various religions. Some of them has the name of the physician that was attending, who the person that made the return, and when it was done. So this is the record. Again, we're interested in Vincent, but I just want to show you just sort of everybody on this page was due to the Halifax explosion, as would be expected. A few things, like I said, to note is he was Roman Catholic, so if I didn't know what cemetery was here, there's a couple Roman Catholic cemeteries that are specific in Halifax. At this time in Nova Scotia, your cemeteries, your hospitals even were Catholic, Protestant. If you weren't one of those, if you weren't Protestant or Catholic, generally you probably would have went to the Protestant hospital, Protestant graveyards or cemeteries even, with the exception of for cemeteries, there were some, I want to say, part of some of the, and I think particularly this cemetery here, there was a Jewish section. Interesting thing about this cemetery, it's also where a lot of the people who died during the Titanic were buried, around Mount Olivet. Holy Cross Cemetery, this one here, this is another Catholic cemetery. It's actually where my father's family is buried for a couple generations. His parents and so my grandparents, my father's grandparents, which would be my great-grandparents, obviously, that's where they're buried. This is more of in the south end of the city. And Snow and Company, generally, it probably would have been considered the Catholic funeral home undertakers. Even those were separated a lot, but at this point, you'll see that there's not, as far as the cemetery, they were just being dealt with the undertakers wherever they were. So, as I said, the thing I wanted to note was Mount Olivet Cemetery. So when we're looking for cemeteries, really, where we'd look is we'd want to look at Find a Grave. So here on Find a Grave, I'm searching for Vincent Coleman, and not Halifax, North Carolina. Halifax County, Nova Scotia, Canada. Been to Halifax, North Carolina. Halifax County, North Carolina. It's a nice place. I have an actually nice picture of the water tower, and right around there, there's also Nash County, which I have a picture of its water towers too. So, did it find anybody? It didn't find them here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refine my search, and I'm actually going to try, not look Vincent. I'm just going to try Vince. I was searching Vincent because that would be a formal name. So here we go. Vince Coleman. Mount Olivet Cemetery, December 6th, 1917. Now here it gives his date of birth of 1874. Again, when we were looking at his death records, it said he was 42. That would be 1875. Like I said, unless it was between December 6th and December 31st, then it would actually be 1876 based on this. So let's see why they have him down there. let's take a look at them. It gives us all kind of information, and this is what we're interested in. It tells a little bit about them. I'm going to make this a little larger for us to be able to see a little better. It's not. So it says, in loving memory of P. Vincent Coleman. Actually, I know because when I was looking him up online to clarify some things, I did see that he was named as Patrick Vincent Coleman. You noticed in the death record it was Vincent J.P. It says he died in 1917, and here it says aged 45. So that is even a little more contradictory than the other, the actual face of this when it said he was his age. He said he was born in 1875, but this would actually suggest he was born in 1872. Then it has his wife's information, Frances. Remember I said it was Frances in the marriage records. This is one of the ways I confirmed. And she was born in 1877. She died in 1970. She died actually 10 days before I was born, which is interesting. And what else do we have on Vincent here? And there is a picture of Vince. We go back to the video. It's a fairly decent likeness of him. So that's what we have at Find a Grave. Again, it tells us this information here. Great thing. Tells us his parents. Tells us his spouse. Has a picture of her. Gives us his siblings and his children. So a lot of great information. Gives a little bit of a story about him. Basically what we watched in field. Gives a few more details, and the fact that it tells that he was the train was that he was on at Pier 6, and that's where the train was going. It tells the story how he stopped it. So here it's saying he was born 1874. This here, if this is the correct age, that he was 45 when he died, then it would have been 1872. Okay, so again, we're looking at his death. As I said, there was also his marriage record. So likewise with the death certificate, the death record, you're not gonna always see the actual marriage certificate, depending on when. I know my grandparents, I found theirs from 1943. I actually have all the details, but this is the common thing which you would see. So we have them. They were married on June 17th, 2002 in Halifax, and they're Roman Catholic. We have Vincent J. Coleman and Frances Amelia O'Toole. Definitely sounds Irish. That would be pretty common for that area of Halifax. There's a lot of Irish people. The church in that sort of area is St. Patrick's. Lists his occupation as operator. Again, he was an operator at I don't know what you exactly called it, with the trains. It gives his parents, Daniel and Agnes, as we saw on the Find a Grave, his wife's parents, his father was a storekeeper, and it gives the two witnesses. This would be very common. Very common for this. It doesn't give an occupation for her father, um, but again, it gives the witnesses. So this is a very common for a Nova Scotia one. For this error, it's just you're going to see the list of names in order. So this started June 1st, and then it got to June 2nd. And these would be the order that they would have been registered with the city. This would be in their registrar. Okay, so some other places we can look is censuses. Now, Canada earliest census, the latest census we can, the most recent rather, is 1921. They're done every 10 years. So we look at the 1911 census, and basically for this, all the census sites in Canada are very much the same. This one here is the 1911 one that I had. You go to Library and Archives, you can find the different censuses by clicking on census and the year. When you find the records, you have an option of viewing them in JPEG or PDF. So we're going to look at the 1911. Now this was really interesting. I actually couldn't find it by his name because, well, I'm going to show you where he is. He's right there. I don't know if you can see my mouse. You can't see my finger. I know why I'm pointing. So right here we have him, and it's Vincent, Francis, and you'll see their children there. It shows, yeah, it's really, excuse me, really hard to read. It's really worn. So I'm not going to really get a lot of information. If I scroll over here, as you can see, it's really, really hard to get much. One thing I can tell, he's Canadian, so he was born in Canada. Actually, he was born in Halifax. I know that from looking up other records. But this is what we have, so it's the 1911 one's not the greatest. The 1901, since he was married in 1902, I do not suspect to find him and his wife, but I do suspect to find him at his father's. So when I look at them here, I'm going to make this larger. This one is nice and relatively clear. So we have Vincent. He's the son of the head of the household, which is Daniel. Now, it gives his birth date as March 14th, 1875. So, the record on the Find a Grave site has him as 1874. On his death certificate, as I said, if he was 42, that would be 1875. So I'm going to say that he was 42. Not 45 like on the grave marker. Not 43. Like this says, because the census. Now can't find a birth certificate, so again, I can't be sure. It can't be 100%. All depending who took this information, but I would say this is pretty consistent, based on what was actually recorded at his time of death as well. So I would say this is an accurate. Has the date off by one day. Again, that could be his wife's remembering, because depending when that tombstone was actually erected, or the monument. It has him here. He was 26. So this is 1901. In 1917, he'd be 16 years later, he'd be 42. So that's the 1901 census. I could go back farther, but this gives me information really good. I can see his siblings. There was two sisters of his that would have lived at that location still at that time. Again, if we go here and we looked at his family, it doesn't have either of his siblings. It doesn't have either of the sisters. So let's see, though, when we're looking at that, what did it say he did? Was he working for the railroad yet? One thing here, it's going to tell you your origin. He's Irish, which makes sense they would marry an O'Toole, her also being Irish. And it's not giving an occupation for him. Interesting seeing some of the occupations there, just labor, wharf builder. This particular census, the 1901, had a lot of information about their employment and sort of what they made. Gave some education levels, and gave their primary language. Let's see here. I could bring up the key, which does tell me, but let's look here. So, how many months they were in school, a bunch of different things about their language. So we're not really too interested in that, but it is interesting that at this point he doesn't have a listed occupation. He was 26. I'm sure he was working somewhere, but it wasn't listed on his. Could just be that whoever provided the information, whoever took the census, just didn't put it down. It looks like consistently they were just putting the heads of households, as you'll see. You know, it's generally skipping, and if I look at all the ones that aren't, so the third from the top there. So we have head, the wife of head, Mary. She was the person who would have, and then Michael. So they're given their occupations of the heads of household. So it's pretty consistent through there. Looks like he missed doing a few numbers down there. And it doesn't give a street, but it gives the what was basically the sequential number of the family and also the house. That's why you'll see these numbers. You might have house 208, but you're up to family 221, because there could be multiple families in a single house. None on this particular page that come out, and down here actually there's one. 209, and this is family. It was family 222, and then family 223. And again, it continues sequentially. So you get those cases where you do have, in these censuses, where you have the people there. So we looked there, and we looked at 1901, 1911, and we're going to look at 1921. Obviously, I will not find him here, but I will find his wife. So I have their address. This gives their full address at the time, which is interesting. It's showing as 6 Jennings Street. If we go back to his death record, at that point he was living on Russell Street. Sometime between when he died and 1921, so 4 years later, a little less because this is done in May, the family had moved. It gives his children her children, which would be his. Again, it lists her as head because she's a widow. She's listed as being 43, female. This column here is the marriage column. You have S for single, M for married, and W for widow, widower. This is where they were born, and then where their parents were born. So she was born in Nova Scotia. She didn't immigrate, so there's no naturalization year. She's born in Canada, Irish descent, Roman Catholic. So what did it list her there? We're looking. Well, here actually it's interesting. They have her as English descent. Sorry. On the previous one they said Irish. This says English here, so. But then the rest were Irish, and the kids. This next one, Scotch, which is interesting because that is not a. From Scotland, do not say they're Scots. They're a Scot. Scotch is something you drink. And it lists her here as occupation, none. There's her kids, students, and then none. And this here was, it says it's instructions, basically whether they were a student. Let's see, what is it? Yeah. And it wants to know, can they read, can they write, and their mother language. I think it says months at school. So okay, now this is interesting because they have these weird numbers here for different people. So these look like they're adults, whereas these are students, so they're 9. So I don't know why they have these higher numbers for non-students. What the person was trying to record there. And there we go. So there's the basic genealogical records to get started. We know a lot, and this is a great example of how you can look up your own ancestors. Start with something you know. In this case, we knew his date of death, we knew his name, so we were able to find that from finding his death date. We were able to then find where he was buried in the death records, searched on Find a Grave, found where he was buried. We were able to confirm who it showed us as a spouse in our initial search. From that information, we were able to search some information on census, give us some more details on children, and the case, the census before he was married, the year before he was married, we found out his parents and his siblings that were still at home. We could go back the further 10 years, and we'd probably find his other siblings that were still at home at that point. In the 1921 census, we actually found that his wife had moved after he passed away, after he died in the explosion. So anyways, this is what we have found out about Vince Coleman. It's a really interesting story. I really encourage you to look up, if you don't know about the Halifax Explosion, get some information. It's something that children growing up and educated in Nova Scotia, they learn, at least when I was alive, and my wife more so because she lived in the Halifax area. I was all her education. I never lived in the Halifax area until I was in university, but I had lived in Nova Scotia for from grade 9 to grade 12, but not in Halifax. But it was something that was taught and something that was remembered. In Halifax, they still have a remembrance ceremony. I was talking about the relationship between Boston and Halifax earlier. Every year, if you've gone down to Boston, my wife and I were down there in 1998. It was the year after we were married, sort of a late honeymoon. We went down. We didn't actually know this was happening at the time, but it was the weekend it was happening. There's a Christmas tree that the province of Nova Scotia sends down to Boston, and it's at, I believe it was the Prudential Center then. I don't know if it still uses that name, but they light it up, and it's a massive tree. It's a big honor for Christmas tree farmers to be picked to be the tree for Boston. It's something that it's just a way of the province to continue to show their appreciation for the people of Boston. I'm sure most people in Boston walk by, they don't realize if they're just seeing it from distance, because there is information about it, and I know in the actual lighting ceremony they explain it. But what's all behind it? They're very thankful. They were one of the first places that responded en masse with supplies and relief, which was much needed. Because the one thing I didn't mention yet was, not only did it destroy all these houses on December 6th, on December 7th, a blizzard arrived in Halifax, covered over these houses, made it harder to search for people, made it harder for people that were alive in their houses to be found even. So the relief was really needed. And it's something that people in Nova Scotia and Halifax are still thankful for to this day. Those who had family members and heard stories, it's something I think we need to keep telling people. People need to learn it as the younger generations, just to get a picture of the destruction that can be caused. And again, this wasn't anything intentional. It was two ships collided. It was navigation errors, basically, or driving error. It wasn't a huge crash. I'm sure it was really scary to the people who weren't right down at the harbor, who didn't realize it was two ships that collided, because this was during World War One. I'm sure if you were living not from view of the harbor, you were wondering, did we just get attacked? Because they would have been hearing about the U-boats and other things off the coast. So it's a really interesting story. Vince Coleman's an interesting person. Like I said, got some basic information there for genealogical sources where you can start. Search him out. And like I said, he might not have considered himself a hero, but to the people on the train that he prevented from coming into the city and being impacted more greatly than they would have by that explosion, he definitely was a hero to them, their families. Just an everyday hero. So again, this is my first sort of video on doing this type of reaction thing. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Remember, again, subscribe, and thank you for watching. And keep searching for your ancestors, and I hope you find them, and I hope you find that some of your ancestors were everyday heroes too. Every life has a story, and every family has a story, and that's what I'm here to tell.